When I was around 7 years old, my mum and I lived in these apartments in a border town. My mum's a single mother, and in our apartment complex, like most, it had a playground in it. Luckily, our apartment was on the bottom floor and right next to the playground. And like most kids, I loved playing there. Every day I would play there, and I honestly can't remember, but my mum either went inside the apartment to grab something or let me play alone, but while she was gone, a random lady approached me. I'd never seen this lady before, but she told me that she had a huge Barbie doll house and a lot of toy Barbies. She told me that she lived not too far and asked if I wanted to go and play. I remember saying I have to ask my mum first, and that's when she said that she knew my mum and that it's okay. I didn't know any better and I agreed to go. She grabbed my hand and led me to her house. She did have a lot of Barbie toys too, and I was playing, but she didn't have other children around, so I'm not sure why she had all those dolls. Apparently I was gone for some time because it started to get dark, and that's when there were loud bangs on the front door. The lady opened the door and it was my mum. She looked so frightened. She grabbed me and moved me out of the apartment complex soon after that happened. And honestly, I don't really remember what happened after that. This memory came back to me not that long ago, and my mum told me that that was the worst thing that has ever happened. But I don't remember feeling afraid. Honestly, who knows what that lady had planned for me. Since we live like 5 minutes from the Mexican border, it is known for trafficking children, and I could have easily been taken to Mexico and never seen again. My mum did tell me that the only reason that she found me was because a bystander saw me walk off with that lady, and then saw my mum frantically looking for me. And who knows what would have happened if that person hadn't have seen me that day. So 3 of my friends and I drove to Breezewood as a staging ground for a nice nighttime tour of the abandoned PA Turnpike. It's a long underground tunnel that cuts through the mountains. In the spirit of October, we decided to check it out late at night, so we set off from our hotel in Breezewood around maybe 10:30. To get ourselves even more psyched up, I played some creepy music along the way as we entered the dark forest. We arrived at the entrance of a trail that leads to a section of the Sidling Hill Tunnel about maybe 15 minutes later. But for the next hour and a half, it was mostly chill. We walked to the tunnel entrance, explored a little side room, and overall messed around in the tunnel by laughing at all the funny graffiti and taking cursed videos. When we reached the end of the tunnel, though, we spent maybe 10 minutes looking around for a way up to the ventilation room. We couldn't find a path outside, and the staircase leading up was destroyed. We turned around to being our long walk back, but within 5 minutes of backtracking, we noticed something when we all turned off our lights in the tunnel. There was a faint light shining behind us. Out of what seemed to be sheer instinct, I guess, 2 of my friends began running, more of a jog than a sprint. Me and the other friend kept up, and eventually we slowed down and made our lights as dim as possible. At first I was unsure of why we were being so paranoid, but one of my friends later pointed out how it's better to not take any chances of encountering someone past midnight in such a secluded area, so it made sense. What added to our suspicion, though, was how the people, we assumed that it was at least 2, behind us were not only pursuing us, but we could tell that they were running by how their lights were bouncing, but how they occasionally called out into the darkness of the tunnel, and how they occasionally blacked out like we did. Our fast walk turned into a full-blown sprint after we eventually hear a very loud resonant metallic sound, like a huge gong being struck, which of course was amplified and reverberated by the tunnel's acoustics. Even while sprinting, I saw that light behind us bouncing up and down as if they too were running, and getting closer now. We got out of the tunnel, shaken by what had just happened, and reflected on how suspicious it was that not only they pursued us, but also turned off their lights from time to time. We were also confused about the source of what could only be described as a loud gong. A friend jokingly brought up cultists, but I assumed that they were just messing with some loose metal pipes. We all made it home with no sign of them pursuing us outside of the tunnel, but I'm glad that we didn't take the chance of trying to encounter them face to face. I've given it some thought over the years, and whatever those people were up to, it definitely didn't seem good. So this took place over a few years in a farmhouse in the desert of Arizona. It was newly developed land. We moved into the place when I was 15. At the time, I was going through a lot emotionally and smoking a fair bit of weed too. And I guess that could explain some of my personal experiences, so I'll try not to dwell on them too much, but here it goes. So the house was set up almost plantation style. It was very wide and narrow, a big wraparound porch and lots of awkward corners. The front room was a tall library with an open balcony to the upstairs, which ran into long skinny bedrooms. My parents' room was closest to the stairs and attached to a nursery with a sliding ensuite door. My brothers, 2 years younger, and my room were at the end of a dark hallway. That side of the house never got sun to it, so it was always bad vibes all around down there. Downstairs, too, there was a really messed up Harry Potter-style closet, a sunken living room, a kitchen in the center of the house, and a sunken playroom for the baby. And everything started the first day that we moved in. So my brother and I were the only ones in the house, just unboxing plates. The place was so empty that everything echoed, and I swear it sounded like a little girl laughed, like a creepy track that you could get off an app or something. Keep in mind that the TVs were not plugged in yet, and we were on an acre of land far away from the dirt road, and my brother was way too stupid to pull a prank like that. But it wasn't just this, too. You see, I started hearing voices at night. This wasn't unusual, too. I honestly used to freak myself out so badly that I think I made up noises to scare myself, maybe? Anyway, my parents had raised me not to talk about things scaring me, to tough it out and be a big girl. It was fine most of the time during the day, and everything always happened at night, but I do remember distinctly when it started messing with me in my bed. In solidarity, my brother and I kept our bedroom doors open for hallway's nightlight, and in case we needed to call for each other too. We had a pretty messed up childhood that might have contributed to all the codependency I'll describe during this, but I was falling asleep, well, not quite out at this point, when I felt the blanket slipping off the bed and reached down to grab it. This was common too. I didn't have a bed frame with a foot, so it kept slipping no matter how I tried to tuck it though. And in classic horror movie fashion, the last time that I pulled it, I felt tension. There was nothing that it could have caught on, mind you. I feel like the second that I went from confused to terrified, it bounced back to me too. I don't know how to explain this well too, but put it this way, I was sure that someone was under the bed, pulling it away from me. Later though, I moved another nightlight into the bedroom. It was a kind of spooky amber orange, and I convinced my parents to let me paint the walls cherry red. Again, I was almost asleep, but not quite there, so I don't think it could have been sleep paralysis, when I heard the carpet sort of rustle and maybe some joints cracking. Whatever it was, it sounded like my mum had come to check on me. I opened my eyes quickly and immediately froze. Now, I don't think I've ever been more scared than this in my life, but there was a woman crawling across my floor from the far side of the room to the foot of my bed. She was pale and stringy-haired, like she was going bald. I couldn't see her face. I don't know how I fell asleep too that night, but I couldn't scream or move. I think she disappeared under my bed at some point. Again, I know that this could all just be a hallucination, but man, did it feel real. Another time, my baby brother was about 7 months old when she started coming out during the day. My mum was a teacher at the time and was able to stay home with us during summer vacation. It was lunchtime and we were watching a movie quietly downstairs while the baby napped. There were noises upstairs, like something dropped to the ground. We listened for a second before my mum ran up. She thought that the baby may have fallen out of the crib. We found the door and found him asleep. But then we noticed that there was some really weird stuff on the floor, and it took us a while to figure out what it was, but it was like drywall or something. There was a crawl space to a small attic where the AC and the insulation could be reached. It was barely big enough to get into and a good 9 feet from the ground. It also had to be pushed up and slid over to open, but there was a visible gap. The carpet was a really ugly dark blue, so we could see white spots all over the ground like something was dragged from one side of the room to where the crib was. It stopped right in front of it too, but my mum checked the closet and called my stepdad. He couldn't leave work, so we stayed downstairs until he got home and checked the crawl space. We never had any animals, and it's really difficult for most things to live in Arizona, so wildlife is pretty rare in that area. But he didn't find anything or any signs of anything living up there. And this happened every other day for like 2 weeks too. We really didn't know what to make of it. My mum even thought that it might have been the AC suctioning the opening up or something. It stopped though eventually, and it never happened again for like 2.5 years. When my baby sister was born and stayed in the same crib, again, it happened on and off for a few weeks and then never again. But the AC never popped that opening open, so we have no idea what was happening. Now, to keep my own solo experiences a little bit more brief, I had a period of 3 months where I straight up didn't sleep pretty much. I actually went a little bit crazy, I think, but every night I felt like my bed was shaking. At the instant that I laid my head down, it would vibrate, the metal frame would sway, and I'd feel like someone was pushing on the mattress between the baseboards or sitting on the corner or something. I had my brother touch the frame one night too to tell me if it was shaking, or was it just in my head. And he said that it wasn't just in my head, but I'm not sure if he was just playing into it or not. Hard to say. I thought I might have been having seizures or something at one point, and I got so frustrated with it that I started sleeping on the couch downstairs with the dog. And it was at this point that I started hearing whispers too. Not a noise that sounded odd, but like someone calling my name. And my name has like 3 syllables, so it's not like I misheard it. I would be in my room, door open, doing something at night after my parents went to bed. It was a female voice, but it sounded off. I don't know how to explain it, but the downstairs really scared me after the lights went out, so I never went down, but I did walk to the balcony to look down. Mind you, I never saw anything, but the whispering would always stop when I got close. Then my brother started hearing it too, which really freaked me out. He's kind of weird. His life's dream has been enlisting in the army, so his reaction was always getting his knife and walking right downstairs to confront it. He'd turn on the lights and look around before coming back up. He even slept on my floor a few nights because he was convinced that she wanted me. We had prior haunting experiences, which led my parents to making jokes that the ghosts follow us. They just didn't pay much attention to it, as this time when it was quiet. Now one night, my parents went out with the babies. My brother and I were in our rooms, doors open as usual, when we started hearing something weird. I thought it was the wind. It got louder too until it was clear that a woman was wailing in our house somewhere. I know it sounds crazy, but it was clear, man. We hid in my room, it was that clear, for what felt like hours, calling my mum. For some reason, too, it didn't occur to us to call the police at this point. But eventually, the crying stopped. We hatched a plan to run for the stairs and out the nearest door. All the lights were on in the house, and my brother had his stupid knives like normal. But it was like it knew that we were going to leave. We heard shuffling outside the door and maybe breathing at one point too. It could have just been the air conditioning, but we kind of decided that we were ready to die, unlocked the door, and we just booked it. The crying started again, and this time it was clear that it was in my parents' room. We got out though, and we stood outside the property line for like an hour, waiting for them to come home, watching the house. No one could have gotten out without us seeing it, but we had huge windows lining the upstairs hallway that showed everything with the lights on. My parents, they actually made fun of us and still do about that night. A few other incidences included my brother talking to the man upstairs. He'd stand in front of the balcony and talk up to someone. He told us that the man was hiding in my room. He talked about the man in the window and would ask, "Who's that?" directed at the doors at night. I don't want to talk about all of it, obviously, but there were just so many instances of voices, door slamming, and things being knocked over in my room that I honestly thought that I was losing my mind. And it was at around 18 that I moved out and came back occasionally, usually just to babysit. Apparently, my reluctant believer mother and absolute skeptic stepdad watched a coffee pot jump off the counter at one stage when I was gone. They also were sitting outside having a fire open evening when they saw a figure in the balcony window of their bedroom. It was a tall man, but my stepdad still needed urging to go upstairs. It appeared a second time, closer to where the nursery door was. My mum said that she had terrible dreams about a man in the corner of her room after that. She was present for many of the times that we heard footsteps upstairs too, doors slamming when the AC was off, all that sort of stuff, but she always denied there being anything wrong, which was always weird to me. My parents left town with the kids for a week at one point, and at this point I was 19 and living happily an hour away. My mum begged me to check on my brother and stay a few nights for the weekend. I arrived during the evening after I got off work, and I asked how it had been alone, and he said that he was fine. He just didn't go upstairs at night and minded his own business. He said that if he ignored it and tried not to get scared, then it ignored him. He felt safe with the dog too, and we were watching YouTube and eating when we started hearing a sort of a deep noise. At first I thought it was a bike or one of the small buggies people drove out there, but then I noticed that it was holding a tune. It was humming. The dog had a weird thing about staring into the bathroom if the door was open too, which was scary at night, but this time the door was closed and he still stood up and stared. The noise was so deep, in fact, that it sounded like it couldn't be human, but it was definitely melodic. There was nothing that I could figure out to explain it to, but my brother and I just kind of looked at each other. Then a door slammed upstairs and we decided to just get out and go for a walk at that point. When we got back, I decided that I would sleep in my parents' room. It didn't feel right to stay in the kids' room, but looking back, it would have been the best way to stay close to my brother. I fell asleep that night, surprisingly easy too. I guess about 2 hours passed before my brother slammed the door open. The house smelt like it was burning. Not really like fire smell, but like burning plastic and trash. I was panicked. I was the adult and didn't know what to do. When we checked the house, I turned off the air conditioning thinking that it might be on fire internally. We opened all the windows and eventually fell asleep on the couch downstairs. The next day the smell was still lingering but less overwhelming, and the air conditioning was fine when I turned it back on. Like usual, the day was fine, but that next night my brother and I went on a Jack-in-the-Box run. It might have taken like 30 minutes, but we arrived home to a mess of blood, vomit, and excrement of some sort. And eventually we figured out that the dog was sick all over the living room. Well, we immediately took him to the emergency vet, certain that he was dying. They checked him for everything that they could, and they gave him a clean bill of health. But when we got home, everything just broke loose. You see, my brother and I were cleaning up the mess with the doors open for airflow, and there was absolutely insane banging noises from upstairs. We hadn't looked up on the way out, and my brother thought that someone must have snuck in and was trashing the upstairs. He went up to check, and I hung downstairs ready to call the police, but nothing happened. Nothing even seemed out of place, which was really weird. We kept cleaning though, but the noise started almost immediately. It kind of sounded like someone was shouting behind a wall of cement. I couldn't tell the gender, but my brother told me that he had been fine until I got there, that I could leave if I wanted. I totally did, and after that, I didn't go back. My parents actually sold the house this year. During the interim of the move, they stayed in an Airbnb. My brother lived really close to his work, so he stayed in the house with the dog for a few weeks. And this story just on its own is so weird that I'm still not sure if I believe it. Like I said, he's kind of weird, but not one to embellish, that's for sure. Anyway, he had been hearing the usual things, even his name being called in the night, but ignored it all. His friends had been coming over to keep him company, and the last day that he was supposed to finish moving, he brought a friend. He says that they felt like they were being watched the whole time that they cleared the place out, and his friend left him to lock up. They got into the car facing the house when they noticed the blinds were open, and they were definitely closed on the way out. And his friend claims that he actually saw them open from the side of his eye. My brother then says that there was a woman squatting in front of the downstairs window, close to where he had just left from. She was pale, her nose was sort of hooked, and her hair was black and stringy. Again, it's the classic horror movie ghost, I know, but he said that she had black eyes with visible white dots in the middle, inside-out eyes as he called them, and she was smiling. He says that it took him a good second of shock to realize that she was looking right at him too. He felt sick too, like she could walk right out and get him. Upon seeing this, though, they burned rubber when his friend snapped out of it, and they screamed at each other all the way down the road about what they saw. He called me right after to explain it, but I was with friends and not really willing to listen at the time. What messes me up so much is that my mum thought that he had a psychotic break. He went into his room and cried all night at the Airbnb after it too because, well, nobody really believed him. She thought that something had happened with his girlfriend. My brother is not a crier at all either. I haven't seen him do it since like we were babies basically. But when we got together and talked about it, his eyes teared up then too. He said that he didn't know why, but he just knew that she wanted to kill him. He even drew a picture of her, and it's not great, but it still fills me with this deep foreboding feeling. And it took me a little while to realize that I had seen this woman too, just once in my bedroom, almost 5 years ago. Seeing her suddenly made a lot of sense, and I knew that it just didn't feel like a woman, but it definitely felt feminine, if that makes sense. It felt like something pretending to be a woman, maybe? Anyways, this is getting long, so I better stop here, but feel free to offer any of your opinions. My ex brought up this today. We dated all through high school and had a few experiences together even that she recounts as her only paranormal encounters. I would love to still think that this is my own delusions, but it was shared by just too many people to be that, right? I mean, maybe a few things are explainable, but most of it just isn't. It's affected me so deeply that I'm still terrified that if I think too much about her, that she'll follow us a state away now. Oh, and I also forgot to mention that we heard word from neighbors that the previous family had 12 people, Mormons living in the house. We could only fit like 6 into it. But they were really weird apparently, according to multiple families, and they moved in with 5 kids and only left with 4. And we heard that something terrible happened. We have no idea if any of this is true because we couldn't find any documentation, but it is interesting that this is all rumored to have happened. Anyway, that's all I really have for now, and I hope you enjoyed the stories as hard as they are to tell again. I'll also try and answer any questions if you guys want to offer some comments below. Thanks. I used to sleep in a room that my grandfather used before he passed away. He moved into my house the last 2 years of his life because he was left alone after my grandmother passed away and needed help being taken care of. Before that, I slept in a garage converted to a room, but we ended up needing the space for storage. After my grandfather passed and his room was available, I moved into his room. When the bed shaking first started happening, I took my mattress off and flipped the bed over, thinking that maybe rodents had somehow got inside the mattress, and I was feeling them run around inside of it. That's somewhat what it sounded like too. Just light but rapid tapping of the mattress at many different spots underneath me. I inspected every inch of the bed and mattress, but I never found anything, and nothing on the floor either. No trace of any animal or anything. But it would always start happening when I had shut off the lights, and as soon as I sat up in bed, it would always stop. When I would lay back down, it would start up again after a minute or two, and it got to the point where it would wake me up after falling asleep. I ended up being very sleep deprived for as long as it lasted. This went on for about 3 months. After the first month, I got rid of my mattress and bought a new one, but the problem persisted. Sometimes, out of frustration, I would slam my fist into the mattress in hopes that if there were mice or some type of a living creature that somehow had gotten into my mattress, that me hitting the bed very hard a few times would make it stop. But it never did. I would also place my hand between my body and the mattress to check and see if I was having some type of muscle spasms at different parts of my body, but there were no spasms. In fact, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was causing it. When I would sleep on the sofa in the living room, I didn't experience the issue, but the sofa just wasn't comfortable to sleep on, and I would only sleep in there on occasion where I wasn't so exhausted from sleep deprivation that I was able to fall asleep while being uncomfortable. And then it got to the point where, well, I was afraid to go to sleep. I was a grown man who doesn't believe in the paranormal, but I was afraid for whatever reason. I guess it's because it's so bizarre, and I just couldn't find an explanation after all that time spent trying to figure it out. At one point, too, I went out of town with my brother and stayed with my aunt for the weekend, and it was really refreshing. The bed didn't shake, and I slept really well. I even talked to my brother and told him the issues that I was having at home, but he never had any issues like what I was experiencing. It changed, though, from just an annoying occurrence into something that was scary after I stayed the weekend at my aunt's. You see, normally when I would sit up in bed, it would stop, but it changed all of a sudden to where it would keep going after I sat up, and I could really feel the bed shake and hear the bed creaking as it shook. But below my bed was just empty space. The floor was about 6 inches below the bottom of the bed. And then one day, it just stopped. I never felt anything out of the ordinary, just after one random day that it just stopped, but for weeks after I was still afraid when I went to bed. This happened several years ago, and I still sleep in that same room. But I'm wondering if anyone has ever heard of anything like this happening to somebody else. I'm 100% certain that it wasn't my imagination too. I clearly felt it and heard it for a period of weeks, every single night, and I was wide awake when it happened, to the point where I was like getting out of bed and flipping the mattress and everything. But it's just so weird when I think about it. I took a very scientific approach to try and understand what the heck was happening, but in the end I came out completely empty in finding any explanation.